Okay, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. Okay, today we're going to be going over Psalm 19, and we're probably only going to be going over the first 6 verses in English, and that would equate to the first 7 verses in Hebrew. And hopefully today is going to be just an awesome exposition. Okay, coming here to our first slide, what I have here is I have 2 different analyses of the text. One is a structural analysis that works very fine, and it's all itemized there at the top of the slide. And then the poetic analysis below. The first 6 verses would be one stanza divided into strophe A and strophe B, and so I did the A and B color coordinated so you would see that. Then I have a thick black line at the end of verse 6, which separates into the second stanza, in which is also divided into 2 strophes concerning the law of the Lord, and then the prayer of David, of David's lament in verses 11 to 14. Now, both analyses are used by scholars, and I will poetically follow the 2 stanzas with 2 strophes each. But I do want to understand that the structural analysis can also stand pretty secure, because when you look at this particular Psalms, there seems to be 3 different parts to it. The first part is the hymn of creation, the second part is the hymn of the law, and then the third part is the prayer of David. And those can be easily discernibly I guess explained from any point of view that scholars may approach, and we'll see this by a couple different scholars. What I did here, this explains the text strophographically according to the Hebrew text. I don't know if I want to get too technical for the majority of the listeners of this particular episode here, but for those who are inclined Hebraically, I have broken the text down stichographically. And you can notice here some things as far as the second strophe of the first stanza, beginning at the end of verse 5, we'll just call it 5c, where it says, La Shemesh Sam Ohel Bahim. In them he pitched a tent for the sun. That begins this strophe is consists of 2 tristichs, and it's they're fairly, and they're also chiastically arranged, so that La Shemesh Sam Ohel Bahim is going to match Ve'ein Nistar Mahamato at the end here, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. So we'll look at that when we come to it. But poetically, it breaks down nicely this way, and so that we could see 2 stanzas. And the reason why we're going to keep verses 12, 13, 14, and 15 together with 8 to 11 in the Hebrew text here on the second stanza is because it's the response of David to the the law of Yahweh, and somewhat distantly from the hymn of the of creation. So the hymn to the Torah, this is David specifically, his response to it. We'll look at that when we come to it. But here I have delineated at least the distichs and tristichs into their component parts. So you can use that at your pleasure. And that's my particular reading. It can be stichographically analyzed differently, but I particularly like the two tristichs here in the hymn of the sun in verses 5c to 7. Okay, moving along. Okay, we're coming here to Michael Fishbane, and he's going to look at at this particular psalm as having a tripartite structure. And he says, taken together, Psalm 19 is a religious prayer whose various interlocking features appear under the aspect of speech. In part 1, the heavens and firmament speak, day and night speak, and the sounds and words traverse the entirety of the created order. In part 2, the Torah of Yahweh is a communication of divine laws and commandments. Its words are the instructions of God to Israel. And in part 3, the psalmist refers to his petition prayer as the words of my mouth, in contrast to the words of God's Torah and creation. Speech is then the root metaphor of the entire psalm. So in the first part, creation speaking; in the second part, the law of Yahweh is speaking; and in the third part, the psalmist David is speaking in his lament, his prayer lament. And so you can find this in Fishbane, page 86, on his text, Biblical Text and Texture. Good read. Now coming here to Golden Gay, he is one of my professors that I had at Fuller Seminary, excellent scholar, and he's going to take the poetic, stichographically analyzed representation that this particular psalm has two parts. And so he says, verses 1 to 6 and 7 to 14 thus form the two parts of the psalm, though the second part also divides between the praise of Yahweh's teaching in verse 7 to 11 and the plea in verses 12 to 14. Anyhow, I don't think we need to. I need to read all of this. I'm just letting you know that Golden Gay has his way of his bipartite structure that would follow my poetic analysis, and then Fishbane would look at the tripartite structure of the psalm. Both are very legitimate, and I can basically use them both when analyzing the psalm. Okay, now coming here to just looking at the first strophe is what I wanted to do here. Is I wanted to look at the structure of the very first strophe, and remember that the superscriptions are included as the very first verse in the book of Psalms. So when you have a superscription like this, Lamnat Zeach Mitzmor Le David, to the choir master, a psalm of David, these form the Hebrew text. So not every single particular psalm has a superscription, but the ones that do, they are verse 1 in every Hebrew text. So if through my analyses you can see that I'm one verse off, it's just simply because I'm following the Hebrew text. So let's look at the superscription itself in verse 1. Lamnat Zeach Mitzmor le David. So there's 3 words, and there's 3 particular units to this superscription. First is a title of orchestration, Lamnat Zeach, to the choir master. A psalm, and that's a title of musical genre. So this is lyric poetry, and a mitzmor. I don't know if all of you know this, but it refers to something that is sung with the accompaniment of musical instruments. So it is designed to be musically accompanied by singing. And then lastly, this Lid David, this Lamed Actoris, as scholars refer to it, is the title of authorship. And so this is it's the authorship is of David. And so these are 3 important points that you will find in some of the superscriptions. And it's pretty straightforward. Okay, now coming to the actual text, the hymn of God's creation, in verses 2 to 7. So what you need to, when you read this, you need to see that it's not just verses 2 to 7, or in your English Bibles verses 1 to 6. Okay, because once you come to in the Hebrew text 5c, or in your English text on 4c, you're going to see that the whole the thought has completely changed. No longer is creation anthropomorphically speaking, okay, so to say, but once you come to the part about the Son, it's now the psalmist speaking about the Son, and the Son, or this part of creation, is no longer speaking to us as it was in the first part. So this particular slide here only has the hymn of the heavens, and it's to be analyzed in three sections: the witness of the heavens, that's verse 2, and then the continual witness of the heavens and firmament, continued in verse 3, and then the extent of creation's witness in verses 4 to 5b. And those will be, remember, if it's in English, it's going to be the witness of the heavens, verse 1, the continual witness of the heavens and firmament, 2, and the extent of creation's witness will be 3 to 4b. Okay, and then we're going to look at these meticulously when approaching the text on a in a microstructural way and poetic analysis. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to best back up here and just look at verse 1, or in the Hebrew text, verse 2. And it says, Hashemayim misaprim kevod el, umaase yadav magid harakia. The heavens are reporting the glory of God, or of El, and the Rakia is declaring the works of his hands. And this is it opens with a chiasm in poetically in the Hebrew text, and you can see at the top right hand corner of the text, Hashemayim is going to parallel Harakia, the heavens, that is going to parallel the firmament, and then the verbs here reporting misaparim, verse 2, is going to parallel magid in the second half of the verse, and then the object of these verbs, kavod el, is the glory of God, is going to chiastically be related to the ma'aseh yadav, the works of his hands. And so poetically, this is structured, it's very thought out, it's methodical, and it's very artistic. And you need to know, so that this is somewhat typical for an author to arrange the text in such a way that it opens with a chiasm or a chiasmus, and we saw that in the previous our previous slides here, I believe on Psalm 1. Anyhow, moving on here, it's important for us. We can simply read this and pass on. The heavens are maybe misaparim enumerate. The heavens are enumerating the glory of God. The each one, it is being identified and specified and enumerated, and that's what the heavens are doing continuously. These are it's a PL participle, but this is talking about the ongoing witness of the heavens to the glory of God. So it's doing this continuously, as well as it says ma'aseh yadav magid harakia. The firmament is declaring the works of his hands, or his handiwork, and so some of you probably don't have a clue that this is synonymous parallelism, and you probably don't even have a clue what the firmament is. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1 verse 6, it says there, and Yahweh called the firmament heaven. And so what's happening here is David is reflecting on the Pentateuch, and specifically on the second day of creation, and David knows that the heavens, the Shemayim, is the name given to the Rakia, the firmament, there in Genesis, and it's going to be what's going to become important later in down in verse 5c concerning the metaphor of the tent. We'll see how that comes to play in Genesis chapter 1 verses 14 to 15, where God places the sun, moon, and stars. We won't get ahead of ourselves there, but it's important for you to know that the heavens is the name that God gives to the Rakia. And so I think what we need to do is find out what exactly is the Rakia in Scripture. The Psalter, since we're in the Psalter, it ends, the whole Psalter ends in Psalm 150. Praise Yahweh in his sanctuary, praise him in the power of his firmament. So I don't know the last time you sang a song at your church or synagogue praising Yahweh in the power of his firmament, but some of you don't even have a clue of what the firmament is. You're going to say, well, it's the firma what? And just so you know that where does the word firmament come from? Well, it comes to us directly from the Latin Vulgate, and firmamentum is a Latin term, and when they translated the Latin Vulgate, they weren't using a Hebrew forlog, a Hebrew text. They were translating from the Greek text, the Septuagint of the Old Testament. And so ultimately this firmament stems from the Greek word stereoma, which means something hard or firm. And definitely when you look at Josephus, when he refers to the firmament, he refers to it as a crystalline material. And obviously he's fishing out of Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 22 when he says that, because when you go to Ezekiel 1:22, it's another reference to the firmament, but there the text says that in Ezekiel's his opening vision of the book, where he sees the Ma'aseh Merkava, that is the work of the chariot, Yahweh's throne chariot, that is. He sees the four cherubim and the wheels within the wheels that are part of each creature, and it says there, when you come to verse 22, it says he saw above the heads of the cherubim a firmament stretched out like unto terrible crystal. And so that's why Josephus is going to say that the firmament is something that's hard or firm, and that it's a crystalline substance, is because he's reading out of Ezekiel, and this will be reflected also. You'll see in when you come to Revelation chapter 4, when John's called up to heaven in the throne room, he sees basically something very similar to what Ezekiel saw. He saw a throne on top of a sea of glass like unto crystal. So that's the top of the dome, so to speak. And he sees God sitting on a throne and an emerald rainbow about him. Well, Ezekiel sees the firmament like unto terrible crystal. He sees a throne on top of the firmament and a rainbow brightness round about Yahweh sitting on the throne. So obviously, John in the book of Revelation is alluding to this in his depiction of the throne room in heaven. And remember, the heaven is the top of the firmament. He got Yahweh called the firmament heaven. And so, scholar, you'll pick up your commentaries, whatever. You'll see the connection there in Revelation chapter 4. I think it's verse 6. And when you come to Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, this is another text where it talks about those who bring those who have insight. That's right. Those who have insight will shine bright as the firmament, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. I'm not maybe quoting that exactly right, but it talks about those who impart understanding to others are going to shine as the brightness of the firmament. And then the second half of the verse, and this is somewhat prose that is very, very poetically structured by parallelism. But I don't think you're going to see Daniel 12:3 in poetic distichs. But it could be. It's prose poetry of some type. But the second half then talks about, and those who lead many to righteousness, and you supply the verb that will shine like the stars of the heavens forever and ever. So it talks about the heavens and the firmament there, and it pretty much, you're to understand it as night and day. And we'll be able to confirm this particular part about the firmament when you go to Ezekiel 24:9-10. What it says here in this particular text is that this is when the elders of Israel and Moses, they all have a meal up on the mountain, Mount Sinai, and they see underneath the feet of God a pavement like unto lapis lazuli, or a sapphire stone, and then it qualifies it as the very brightness of the heaven itself, or as the very brightness of the heaven shining in its shining. And so that would, and since it's lapis lazuli, it's blue, well then he's referring to the blue sky. So then now we can infer from these that the firmament is the blue sky that we see above us. And most people, well, it takes you got to go down the rabbit hole, because we're not early Hebrews living back in this particular ancient society where we would all have a worldview, where we would all understand presuppositions that are attached to these words. We live in a cosmological situation of Copernican. So we have no idea of a geocentric universe that the Bible is written in. So I speak of the since I'm a biblical exegete, we have to stick with the text, and so my analysis will then follow the worldview of the biblical authors, and you can read between the lines there. But anyhow, it's important for you to understand what the rakia is, and its purpose back in Genesis is to separate the waters of day one in half. So if you're going to separate a huge ocean size waters, you're going to have some substantial mechanism by which you can separate masses of water, okay? And so it has to be something very firm or hard, as other biblical texts would state, especially when you look at the book of Job. You'll see these references, and that's some homework you can do on the side. What's important here, I do want to note, is that in Psalm 148 verse 4, this is another psalm of creation, and it starts off like, praise him, ye sun, moon, and stars. And then it says in verse 4, praise him, you waters, which are above the heavens. And that's very important, because this is letting us know that the waters of Genesis 1, the firmament, they're all still there. They're still there in David's day. And he's telling those waters which are situated above the heavens. Remember that God called the firmament heaven, so there's the waters above the heavens as well as the waters below the heavens. When you go to Genesis 1, 9 and 10, where he let all the waters beneath the heavens be gathered in one place, and let the dry land appear. So this is speaking about the waters above the heavens, that was the original purpose of the firmament, and which the firmament is still there till this day. And it is separating the waters that are above the blue sky. We will refer to as The Bible refers to that as the firmament or as the heaven. And it specifically does when you look at that vis-a-vis Exodus 24:10, because he said the heavens were shining as blue, and as the pavement, the blue pavement was underneath the feet of God. And then you compare that with Daniel chapter 12 verse 3, and it's all pretty much sewn together. And that would be the best way to understand here. Now when you go back, the heavens are enumerating the glory of God, and the firmament is declaring the works of his hands. So, if you just for example, if you went up to 10 people at your church on Sunday and said, "Hey, tell me how the firmament declares the works of God's hands," they're going to look at you and they're going to say, "The firmament what?" They're not even going to have a clue of what you're talking about. And sorry to say, I'll tell you, your pastors will end up saying the same thing. They won't have a clue. Not all of them. The studious ones will have a clue. But to translate the rakia as sky or expanse or atmosphere is completely illegitimate, and we'll see that. Coming here to Gerald Wilson, in his very excellent commentary in the NIV application commentary, he says this. He says that the Hebrew term rakia, firmament, reflects an ancient understanding of cosmology, the formation and structure of the world that differs from our modern scientific view. The rakia is a sort of upside-down bowl that sat on the circular plate like Earth to form a sealed environment in which human, animal, and plant life were secure. God created this arrangement at the beginning to bring order to the chaotic waters, which were limited by his decree to prescribed boundaries above and below the earth. The celestial objects, sun, moon, and stars, etc., were thought to be fixed in the rakia and to move about there. That is, specifically, you'll see that in Genesis 1:14 and 15, that God placed the sun, moon, and stars inside of the rakia. And you will see here in verse 5, that, or in your English Bible 4, that this becomes the tent that the sun is situated in. Now, moving on to another scholar from Germany, and he had written in this particular lexicon or theological dictionary of the Old Testament in volume 13, he had the entry for the rakia, and this is what Manfred George had to say. He said, "The late literary origin of all these occurrences is unmistakable. Furthermore, especially in the passages that use rakah in a cosmic context, a semantic orientation toward the noun rakia is impossible to miss. Although this association does not mean that we should speak of a denominative meaning of the verb in a secondary use of the stem." He's just having there a little word. He's having a difference of opinion with another scholar here. I believe it was Gesenius. This overview shows that the semic, or this is talking about the semic context, this particular word, its range of word with the verb rakah and the noun rakia. This overview shows that the semic content of rakah should be looked for not in the action's spatial extension, but in its description. Here the aspects of technological compression and intensive stabilization are primary. In P, that he's talking about the priestly author here, his perception of Pentateuchal authorship, including its possible prototext. Therefore, rakia denotes a stable, solid entity situated above the earth, which protects the living world from an influx of the waters of chaos. The noun bears the connotation compact, firm, so that translations such as expanse miss the mark. So, if you're reading an NIV, or if you're happen to be looking at certain particular scholars that really are not following the Hebrew text closely, and its original meaning, because this here is probably the most authoritative theological dictionary we have for the Hebrew Bible. And Manfred George is a Hebrew scholar, and he's an Egyptologist, and so therefore he has I would say a Religionsgeschichte approach, where he understands the background of ancient Near Eastern cultures, especially Egypt and Mesopotamia, in their perceptions of cosmology, of which the Hebrew cosmology shares along with the Egyptians and Mesopotamians and early Sumerians, for that matter. And since we're on Manfred George here, looking at Egyptian cosmology, this is we got to remember that when you look at some of these cosmologies of the ancient world, they're really not kosher, so to speak, and their gods are not the best representations of morality. But they view the sky. What you're looking at here, this woman that is arched over this guy that's laying on the ground. The guy on the ground is Geb. He's the earth, and she is what we would call her the firmament. Okay, so Nut. This is and she is a nut here, and you can see in Nut's body it's embedded with stars, because the stars are embedded in the firmament. And then we have Shu here, the sky god of the air, who's upholding Nut above Geb, and this is just showing you the Egyptians' cosmology, how they understood that their gods represented the different all physical aspects of the universe. So the earth is identified by Geb, and then you have Nut arched above him, and she represents the heaven or the firmament. The stars are embedded within her. Then you have the sky god Shu, and then there's this bark, or this boat that's going. It will come out of her mouth in the morning, and this would be the sun traversing across the sky, and then it enters into her vagina in the evening, and it goes on its circuit, and it comes back out her mouth the second day, and just so forth. So you can see how this is not the most kosher. You would not want to show this to the Sunday school kids. But you need to. I'm showing you this so that you would understand that the Egyptian cosmology has a firmament, and it's something solid above the earth, and it's arched, and And just like we saw when we had Gerald Wilson, and we had the representation of the Hebraic conception of the world, where we had the firmament and the windows of heaven above, and the water above, and the water, and the disk of the earth below. And so the Hebrew cosmology shares with Egyptian and Mesopotamian and Sumerian, just like they do with the flood. All of these societies have a flood story. They have their own Noah. In the Gilgamesh epic, you're going to see that in the 11th tablet. And the Sumerian, they have Zeusudra is their Noah, and they have their own ark, and they have their own ravens, and all of that, all their animals. So there's like 200 different societies throughout the world that have a flood story. So what it is they from the flood we have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah. And so then these traditions were carried down from them, and every society that had any significance and produced their own written materials, they would relate in their early history of a flood and record it, and it would all be changed according to how they changed they left worshiping Yahweh or the God of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, or what became which became the Hebrew Bible, because the God of Noah and so forth back to Adam, it becomes known to us through Abraham, and into Moses as Yahweh. There's a whole history there of Israelite religion and its development. But I would say that all of these different cosmologies share with they have a kernel of truth to it, but it's all become corrupted. But if you look at it, if you look at it hard enough, you can see the connection to it, that they share with a firmament above the earth. And when we come to Mesopotamian cosmology, this particular cylinder sill is the Battle of Marduk, and he's battling with Tiamat, this dragon serpent figure here, and Marduk slays her. And Tiamat is in Mesopotamian religion. She is the goddess of salt water, and Apsu or Abzu, different spelling for Apsu. He's the god of fresh water, and he's the male counterpart to Tiamat, to this serpentine figure. Mother who Marduk slays, and the text says, and I believe on the 4th tablet of the epic, that he slays her like a fish, and then half of her body he creates the firmament above, and the other half of her body is the earth below. And so what Mesopotamian cosmology had in common with the Hebrew cosmology was they both started with water, and then they through this battle with Marduk, him slaying this particular deity, this goddess Tiamat, and slays her body, and half of it creates the firmament, and half of it creates the earth. And then later on in their creation story, then the sun is created and placed inside of the firmament. So what's important is that the biblical text on day 2 creates a firmament, because that's where the sun, moon, and stars are going to be placed, and that the firmament is something hard or firm or crystalline in nature, and above it are the heavenly waters. And so this is why in Egyptian cosmology you have a boat carrying the sun, and they call it a bark. It's just basically a boat that's carrying the sun across the sky. So why would you have a boat carrying the sun across the sky? It's because they understood the waters above. All right, and that is the connection here between all of these particular cosmologies, with the biblical text, and then with Israel's neighbors. And you got to remember, Moses came out of Egypt, so he knew well the Mesopotamian, theology, and I believe this would be Memphite from Memphis, where this theology developed in Egypt. Moving on. Now, coming here to Samuel Noel Kramer, very, very famous scholar from the past of Akkadian and Sumerian history. He also sees that the Sumerians had a worldview exactly just like the Hebrews did. And it's interesting here. It says, in the eyes of the Sumerian teachers and sages, the major components of the universe, in the more narrow sense of the word, were heaven and earth. Indeed, their term for universe was An-ki, a compound word meaning heaven, earth. The earth was a flat disk surmounted by a vast hollow space, completely enclosed by a solid surface in the shape of a vault. Just what this heavenly solid was thought to be is still uncertain, to judge from the fact that the Sumerian term for tin is metal of heaven. Okay, it may have been tin. So the Sumerians see that, if you look at some other Sumerian dictionaries, that they referred to the sky as iron. So they understood that something up there was very hard. And you'll see in the book of Job where it says that the heavens were as hard as a molten looking glass, which is brass that has been polished so that you can see your reflection in it as a mirror. And Elihu is referring to the heavens as hard as a molten looking glass. So within the biblical text, we can see that the people that are related to in the book, or the book itself, stemming directly from God's inspiration, would understand the heavens as being something that is hard above us. And so I'm just showing you this. It's good for you to understand the Bible in its ancient Near Eastern history. And this particular slide, the Code of Hammurabi, is important for Psalm 19. And what you're looking at here is, on the left, you're looking at Hammurabi, and he's a Mesopotamian king. And he's famous for a law code, and that law code is written beneath the throne of this deity. This is Shamash. The Hebrew word would be Shemesh, which is the word sun. This is the sun god who gives the Code of Hammurabi to him. And this is how the stele here is depicted that Hammurabi receives his law code directly from his god Shamash, the sun god. So scholars have noted that, wow, okay, look at Psalm 19, verses 1 through 6. You got the sun, and then all of a sudden in verse 7 you've got the law, or a law code of not a law code, but the praising of the law. So within a Religionsgeschichte approach to Psalm 19, the ancient Near Eastern background, it would be David would be well aware of this whole Semitic background of Shamash and a law code, and that the sun god gives the codes of law to the king, and the sun is their particular deity that they chose to communicate this particular law code through. So say this particular stele with the code of Hammurabi on it. So this is an important part. It's just I'm not going to put a whole lot of attachment of meaning to this, but it's there. It's in the background, and anyone who had any culturalization here would have known this. So it would fit very easily within their particular worldview of having a psalm composed like Psalm 19 about creation, and then the law, and then the prayer. It would all make a lot of sense. So I show this to you so that you can understand that. Remember, the Bible wasn't written to you and I. It was written to David wrote this psalm to back at 1000 BC, and for his generation and to his countrymen, and this was specifically then to be sung in the temple as lyric song, and to be sung, and this needs to be understood by the modern reader. Okay, now finally we're going to get to verses 2, 3, and 4, or in the Hebrew text 3, 4, and 5. I'm sorry, but we had to take up a lot of time explaining words and background material to verse 1 here, especially with the rakia, because there's just so much to unpack. And because it's a completely different cosmological point of view from the moderns, and so I just need to make sure that you understood that the biblical text definitely maintains a completely different cosmology than the moderns would, and so I'm just sticking with the text and following its particular cosmology, because that is what the biblical text presents us and gives us, and it maintains that all the way to the book of Revelation. Okay, so moving along, let's look at the second point here. We looked at the hymn of the heavens, the witness of the heavens themselves. So the heavens are witnessing to the glory of God. The firmament is witnessing to the work of his hands. You can see the parallelism, and we talked about the chiastic structure of how that first verse was constructed. And now when we come here to verse 2 in your English Bible, or 3 in the Hebrew text, it says, day to day bubbles forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. And so let's look at this. Mabua is a noun that means a spring or a well. and the verb nabah in Hebrew is this term here that in verse 2, day to day bubbles forth speech. And I think that's the perfect translation to use. Other translations will say something similar to that, but I'm giving the connotation that is derivative of the semantic range that you would find within the particular verb and noun. Since the noun form mabua, it means a spring. So what does a spring do? It bubbles forth water. And so we can say here that day to day bubbles forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. So we need to look at this very importantly here poetically in this distich, because it has that there's a witness during the daytime, and then there is a witness during the nighttime, and that's going to reflect probably the distinction that you can make when you start talking about the firmament or the heavens. Even though the firmament is called the heavens are something that you're going to take note of at the nighttime, and then the firmament is going to be what we take note of during the daytime, vis-a-vis Daniel 12:3 and Exodus 24:10, that the firmament is shining brightly as a bluish color as the sky itself. So the Bible is defining how we would understand and take note and identify how these words are used in context. And so David seems to be following that, because now he's talking about the daytime witness and the nighttime's witness, and these are continuous. This is 24/7. They never stop speaking. Day to day it bubbles forth speech. These are imperfect, so it's continuously doing this day by day. So when you look up by day or by night to the sky and see all that fills within the firmament, whether it be the clouds and the sun and the and all the different colors that be seen in the day sky or at night sky, is just awesome. And they are speaking. This is what's important. There's a witness of the heavens and the firmament, and there's a witness of the day and night. And this is telling us that creation is speaking to us. Anthropomorphically, David is putting upon creation that it's bubbling forth. What is it bubbling forth? It's speech. So that when you look at the sky, you go, wow, where'd that come from? Well, obviously, it didn't come from a big bang. Okay? Last time I noticed, when I lit a firecracker when I was a kid, or an M80, or a half stick of dynamite, it blew things up and destroyed things. Okay? Big bangs don't create order. All right? That's just a lie of and I'm going to call them suppressors, and you're going to understand where I get the word suppressors from. It will be coming out of Romans. Okay? But the heavens are constantly bubbling forth speech, telling us. They're telling us. What are they telling us? They're telling us of the glory of God and the work of His hands. And night to night declares knowledge. Okay, so when you look at the nighttime sky and look at the vastness of the heavens above us, it's just too awesome. So again, we have synonymous parallelism. Each line here. What's important about line B is that we go from day to night, and so that we have a 24/7 constant witness to the Creator. And the first one, it's bubbling forth speech, and in the second part, the night is declaring knowledge, and it's the knowledge of God. And obviously, David didn't allow anybody to be to maintain an atheistic view. That's why the Bible says that the fool says in their heart there is no God. Look at verse 4. There is no speech and there are no words without their voice being heard. Okay, or we can say here, along with the King James, where their voice is not heard. Okay, so there is no speech and there are no words where their voice is not heard. So that's talking about the extension of creation's witness. So, and then look at verse 5, the next distick. Their line has gone out in all of the earth, and their words at the end of the world. Okay, so here, the extent of God's creative witness by the creation is that every human society, wherever there is speech, wherever there are words, there is a witness. And the creation is speaking underneath the whole heaven. So when it talks about heaven here, it's only talking about the heavens that are viewed here from the earth below. Okay, like it's going to talk about the sunrise and the sunset from one end of the heaven to the other end of the heaven. It's as far as the east is from the west on the earth below the firmament. So here, the extent of creation's witness is very important. And so we're going to see here how Paul is going to pick up on this in Romans 1:18 to 20, where he says that the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness. Okay, now let me I need to read that. Let me pick up my text here and go there. I need to do this. Give me a second. Sorry for my not being prepared for this. Okay. All right. So here we go. All right. So it says here, for the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who are suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. There's the suppressors, okay? Because the knowledge of God is manifest in them, for God has manifested it to them, for his invisibleness from the creation of the world is clearly seen, being understood by what is made, namely his eternal power and divinity, so that they are without excuse. That's my own translation of the Greek text. And so note here that the wrath of God it's a present passive. It's being revealed from heaven ever since man has been upon the earth. Anybody who's suppressing the truth of the knowledge of God by means of creation are liars. So anybody who claims to be an evolutionist, they're just deceiving themselves. They're suppressing the truth. There are no such things as evolutionists that are materialistic. They are without excuse, and they are under the judgment of God, and are being judged by God for not acknowledging God by creation. God's given all the necessary means by which you and I are to know God. You first come to know God by creation. That's your wake-up call. It's wake up and smell the coffee. Okay, you wake up, you walk outside, you see a beautiful sunset, a sunrise. You observe creation, and it's impossible not to know God by creation. And so theologians have come up with natural revelation and special revelation. And this psalm divides in between that. This particular half of the psalm is talking about how we know God by means of creation. The book of creation that some people have commentators have stated. So we know God by the book of creation or by the book of the law, by special revelation. So it's impossible, you guys, for people to maintain an evolutionistic, materialistic worldview. They can't, when they die and stand before God, they're not going to say, "Excuse me, God, I'm an evolutionist." God's going to just, sorry, and he's going to, sorry to say this, but he's going to flush the toilet, and they're going to go down the tidy bowl. So it's very, very important, you guys, for you to maintain a strong creation theology by design. Okay, if there's design, there's a designer. Okay, and I'm going to give you my own particular testimony that I had when I was writing my thesis for my dissertation. A friend of mine, Nya Tran, we both went to Tyndale House in Cambridge, and we were staying at Wolfson College, and there's all these colleges that make up Cambridge, and I'm sitting in the scholar's house, and I was sitting there at the breakfast table, and I met this guy, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm an astrophysicist. I'm here writing a book." And then he asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm a theologian, and I'm here just writing my proposal for my dissertation. And he kind of had a smirk and a laugh on his face. And I said, "Oh, so you want to get into it?" I said, "Are you ready for it?" He goes, "Oh yeah, sure, bring it on." And I said, "Okay, well, let's look at biology. Let's look at deoxyribonucleic acid. Let's look at adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine." I said, "You got the 4 base pairs of amino acids, and they're sequenced on the double helix, okay? And for, like, let's say the human genome, there's 3 billion sequences of those 4 base pairs on the double helix, and they all have to be all 3 billion lines of sequences all have to be correct, or the human being will come out deformed." I said, "A potato has 800,000 sequences on the double helix." And I go, every single living organism, a bird, a cat, a dog, a grasshopper, whatever, a tree, whatever the living organism, everything has this DNA in it. And so I asked them, I said, "So tell me," I said, "what came first? The amino acids or the information encoded on them?" And he goes, "Well, who's to say that your God's the right God?" And I said, "That's it, guy." I said, "You just lost this conversation. It's over." I said, "You were mocking me because I was a theist, and I was studying theology." And I said, "Now you're confronted with the knowledge of God, that it's impossible for all of this intense amount of information encoded on something you can't see except through a high-powered microscope. I mean, how is all this going to assemble at a microscopic level? There's nanotechnology. I mean, you can look into organic chemistry. I mean, it is down at such a level where it is so beyond seen with the naked eye. there's so much information encoded at the microscopic level, it's not even funny. And that's the foundation of everything. It's all down there at that level. So that particular, and I told him, I said, you know what? I said, what your real problem is, you're here sleeping with your girlfriend. And I said, that's your problem. You don't have a problem with God. You do have a moral problem with God. I said, you don't have an intellectual problem with God. I said, you are suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. This is the text you need to use, folks. The Bible declares through Romans and through this particular psalm here, Psalm 19, that the knowledge of God is known and it's everywhere. There is no speech and there are no words where their voice is not heard. It's heard everywhere under the heavens. So never ever allow yourself or anyone else to think that you can believe in evolution. You need to spell that word with a D, devolution. Okay, now coming here to this last slide, we're going to move from how the heavens speak to us, and now look at how your verse 4, the last part of verse 4, in them he pitched a tent for the sun. So that's where the turn comes. Means strophe, literally means turn. Strophe in Greek. So the strophe here is the turn. It's the turn of content. Now we're no longer having, the sun is not going to be speaking, but the author is going to be describing the sun and how it moves across the sky. And it's going to do so by means of metaphor, similes, and phenomenological observation. And those are three very important points. So notice that the metaphor and the similes are in the first tristic, and then the phenomenological observation of the sun's heavenly movement are all situated in the second tristic. So that each tristic is made up of a metaphor, simile, using word pictures is what I'm trying to say there. And then the latter part is David's phenomenological observation, or human observation, of what we observe the sun doing and its effects. So let's look at this. So first of all, he says, in them he pitched a tent for the sun. So you have to come here. You got to ask yourself, what is the them? And within that particular verse, you had Eretz. You had the earth and the world mentioned there. I think other scholars would want to push Bahem back to Shemayim and Rakia. And here's the reason why, is that there's a tent pitched for the sun in them. So what is that? What is this meaning? When you go back to Genesis, you understand that God called the Rakia heaven, and then when he gets to the day 4, God created the two great lights and the stars, and he placed them where? Inside of the Rakia. So the Rakia is David's tent. That's his metaphor. And if you go to Isaiah chapter 40 verse 22, in the second half, it says the same thing, that that he stretched out a curtain, and he stretched out a tent to dwell in. And that's from Yahweh's vantage point of sitting above the circle of the earth, looking down at us as grasshoppers. Remember, Isaiah said, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. So Yahweh's enthroned above, and he's looking down, and he sees us as grasshoppers above the circle of the earth. And then he's describing this is that he stretches out the heavens like a thin gauze or a thin veil, and then in the second half, what he means by that thin veil, that it's a tent. Now this veil is spread out in such a way that it creates a tent, and that is the tent that we all live in, and that Yahweh sits above this circle. That is the top of. He's at the top of the tent, and above us, above on the ark of the Rakia, or the heavens. And that is what is being instilled there by Isaiah in chapter 40, verse 22. Just you can just read the various scholars, Klaus Balzer. You can look at his work. Any of them, you'll see that this is the regnant interpretation. Okay, so it's important then, he's using a metaphor, and metaphors are important for poetry because the pictures create 1,000 words. Just like when God said, when he was speaking poetry to Job from the whirlwind, and he said that that behold, Behemoth has a tail like a cedar. Well, there he's using a simile. He's speaking poetry. And we know that Behemoth doesn't have a cedar tree attached to its tail. So we would understand it and interpret it accurately, that this particular creature of God had a tail the size of a telephone pole, so to speak. Okay? So that's what's important to note here, is that similes function in communicating knowledge effectively. Every preacher wants to have a word picture for people to grasp the concept of what he's preaching about. So likewise, the Bible, and especially within poetry, is going to use metaphor and simile. Likewise, the New Testament, Jesus is the door. Okay? It's a metaphor. It's highly theological. You're not going to find Johannine theologians say, "Oh, we can't talk about this verse because it's a metaphor. Jesus is the door." No, it's loaded theologically. Is that there's no other way to God except through the door of Jesus, and that's how these function. Very, very important. If you want to write comments here, this would be a good place to do that. And I would direct you to 2 Samuel chapter 23, verses 1 and 2. And I'm sure I'll have to answer some questions in your observations and notes on this particular lecture. Okay, so moving on to the similes of verse 6, and in your English Bibles, verse 5. Talking about the Son, he is as a bridegroom going forth from his canopy, rejoicing like a strong man to run a race. So here we have this beautiful distick, and it's giving us a word picture of how the Son is moving. So the sun, when it's coming forth in the morning, it's like a bridegroom coming forth from his canopy. So like this is a chuppah. So this is like a marriage tent underneath. Every rabbi would marry the bride and the groom, and that the groom would come forth out of the canopy to get the hand of his bride, and therefore at the marriage ceremony, I mean, he'd be all beaming, you're all glowing, Nobody gets married and they're bummed out. Okay, everybody's stoked and happy, and we understand why. We don't need to go there, but this is how the Son is. He's being portrayed as a bridegroom coming forth from his chamber. So when you look at that beautiful sunrise in the morning, that warm feeling, and that beautiful sun, it brings a smile to all of our faces, and it's like this bridegroom coming forth to meet his bride. And then it says, and he runs like a strong man, he rejoices like a strong man, to run a race, or his course. So now he's likened to a mighty man, or Usain Bolt to run a race. Okay, so he's all stoked, he's ready to go, and so this is talking about obviously how the sun moves across the sky during the day for its course, and that it's never out of energy. It's continuously going, and it maintains its constant speed. Now, coming here to verse 7, now we have phenomenological observations of the sun's heavenly movement and its effects. So here we left the realm of metaphor and simile, and now these are just David's observations from the earth. And so he says his going forth is from one end of the heaven, its circuit unto the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. So you can see here what I did is I chiastically had these two tristichs related to one another, in that the synonymous parallelism that you get out of verse 5 or 6, whether we're reading Greek or Hebrew or English, is going to be seen against verse 7 or verse 6 if you're reading English, and then these, they're not the end of verse 7, and there is nothing hidden from its heat, leaves now the synonymous parallelism and enters into what the bishop called synthetic parallelism, which just talks about it's just its own statement. And so these two tristichs, the first tristich begins with a one of these particular synthetic parallel lines in the first colon or the first verset, and then it's followed by a distich. So we've created a tristich out of these, and then you can see how they're chiastically related to one another. The synonymous parallelisms parallel one another, and the synthetic parallel one another, and they're chiastically created. So the text is put together pretty technical here, and this wasn't haphazardly put together, very carefully sculpted, very carefully it was weaved together here. And so let's look here at at verse 7, the phenomenological. So its goings forth is from one end of the heaven. So then that's going to then specifically talk about the sunrise, and it's going to relate to he is as a bridegroom coming forth from his chamber, the sunrise, okay? And its circuit to the other end, and that's going to parallel so we have the phenomenological paralleling the similes of the sun's movement, as well as being parallel to one another. So the parallelism is both within these first two versets of this tristich, and the and it's between verses 6 and 7 or 5 and 6, whatever language you're using here. So that's important that we see the parallelism within the distich itself, or the first two versets, and then how compare them with the chiasmus relationship between the two tristichs. And so its circuit to the other end, and that's going to mimic the second or the third verset. He is as a mighty man rejoicing to run his course. So here his circuit is to the other end. So there you go. So the sun is on a circuit, and the circuit is obviously going around in circles above us, above the earth, and the very fact that there's nothing hidden from mechamato, from its heat, then the only way it's not hidden is because of the sun's movement in its course above the earth. Excuse me. That's what's creating here in this text what it means. There's nothing hidden from its heat. That means the sun's movement above the earth. So now for excuse me. Now I want to by this direct your attention to Joshua 10:12, Ecclesiastes 1:5, and Isaiah 38:8. And you'll see here that this is why I tell you that the Bible has a different cosmology than the ones that most of you maintain. If you look at Joshua, it talks about the sun stood still. Ecclesiastes is talking about the sun rises and the sun sets and the sun hastens to rise again. So it's maintaining that the sun is what's moving. And then lastly, in Isaiah 38, where God extends 15 years to Hezekiah's life, and he gives him a sign that the sun's going to go backwards 10 steps in the sundial of Ahaz. So it says that the sun receded backwards 10 steps in the sundial of Ahaz. So I'm very curious if you have a hermeneutic by which to deconstruct Joshua, Ecclesiastes, Isaiah, and Psalm. Please inform us, because clearly here all Scripture is inspired by God and is profitable for doctrine. And so Joshua, Ecclesiastes, Isaiah, and this psalm are appropriate for creating doctrine, even as Paul created doctrine from this particular psalm in Romans 10 and in Romans 1. So likewise, we can create doctrine from this particular hymn of the sun, and if I don't like it, but I don't have a hermeneutic by which to deconstruct these four texts and how they all relate that the sun is what's moving, and it's not the Bible presents a geocentricity, and that's what it does, and it can't be undone unless you just simply have a doctrine of accommodation, where we just don't care about what the Bible said. It's just it means nothing to us now. We have our supposed modern cosmology now. But anyhow, I put this forth to you. It didn't come easy, but I'm basically sticking to sola scriptura, the principle of sola scriptura, and it hurts. It really does. It tends to be divisive with some, that can't allow themselves to maintain a biblical theology, and maintain biblical authority, and maintain that a biblical authority. You can't say here that, well, this is poetry. Well, so is the next verse, verse 8. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The precepts of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. I suppose you're not going to make theology based off of that either now, are you? But it's all written in poetry, so you have a problem here. You can't pick and choose that, verse 6 is not inspired. It's phenomenological. Well, remember, all Scripture is theopneustos. It's God-breathed. It's not anthropopneustos. It's not just man-breathed. It's also God-breathed. So God inspired David to write these similes and these phenomenological observations. And that's why I would direct your attention to the authority of Davidic psalm making in 2 Samuel 23, 1 and 2, and pick up any theology book you got on the shelf behind you, and look to where it has the doctrine of Scripture, and you will see in your indices a reference to 2 Samuel 23, 1 and 2, which will direct you to the authority of Scripture. But you got to remember that when you read that, it's written in poetry. Okay? It's written in poetry, the very doctrine of inspiration. So, you're caught in a conundrum. So, meaning is always context driven, and I'm going to drive the meaning where it belongs, and we have to maintain this even if you don't like it. Okay, this is where we're going to end today. Hopefully this has been enlightening, and hopefully I get some discussion on this. God bless you.